I'm an adult entertainment worker, and I recently had an experience with a client that made me feel sorry for his wife. I had been working in adult entertainment since I was very young. I started at 18, and now I was around 30. Well preserved, I had experienced a lot with clients, made a lot of money, and enjoyed this life. I had never considered leaving it because I saw what men were capable of, especially with their wives. I'm not generalizing, not all men are like this, but I had witnessed many things. Before I turned 18, I had a romantic disappointment that led me to change my life, marking a turning point for me. I decided to follow this path, telling myself I would be fine using men and making money from it. And that's what I did. It was a life I liked and didn't regret. Until the day a client started coming to the place where I worked every night. The man had a lot of money and had become attached to me. Over time, he started spending night after night with me. He always booked 2 hours every evening. After about 6 months of daily visits, he got my contact information and started being more informal. When he came to my place, he gave me gifts, showered me with little attentions, and I enjoyed it a lot. Like him, I had other clients who did the same. Until the day he scheduled an appointment with me. I thought he would come to my place as usual, but to my surprise, he insisted on meeting at the place where I worked. It seemed fine to me. He booked a 5-hour appointment with me, which seemed very strange because, although he visited the place daily, he never stayed more than 2 hours and was always very punctual. He was an older man, and by that time, he had been coming to see me for about 1.5 years. In a way, we were involved, but I wouldn't say it was a relationship. It was something more casual, without involving feelings. Just like I had other clients, I had him, and he never talked about emotions. Everything was about the money. He had booked a 5-hour appointment and was even going to pay more. When I asked him why, given that we had some trust, he said he would explain when he arrived. I got ready and went to the place where he had booked those 5 hours, essentially renting out all my working time. At that point, I didn't need the money as much, so I had reduced my hours. When I arrived, he asked me to wait in the room. I was already there, all dressed up as he liked. I had even chosen lingerie in the color he had requested. He arrived with a young girl who seemed to be in her 20s, with such a youthful face that I thought she was 15. So much so that when he came in, he quickly said, "Don't worry, she's 20. I looked at her, not understanding. I thought he wanted something between the three of us, which wasn't rare for me. I had done that several times before. I asked him why he hadn't told me earlier, but the girl came in with a very shy attitude. She seemed extremely frightened, looking at me with big eyes. She was wearing a wedding ring, meaning she was married. I was sitting on the bed, not understanding anything, and she was completely lost. He gently pushed her to sit on the bed while he settled into an armchair, pulled out a pack of cigarettes, and started smoking, as he usually did. Then he began to speak. He calmly lit the cigarette, taking his time as the smoke began to fill the room. The girl couldn't stop looking at me, her expression a mix of panic and shame. The atmosphere was dense, and I felt a tension I wasn't used to in my work. He, comfortably seated in the armchair, crossed his legs and, with a cold smile on his face, began to speak. "This is my wife. We've been married for just over 1 year. You might be wondering why I brought her here, and I'll explain. She found out about you. Of course, I was never discreet, and to be honest, I never cared what she thought. But the thing is, she's religious and doesn't accept the idea of divorce. So, I thought of something more entertaining, something that could solve our problem once and for all." He took a deep drag from his cigarette and looked at his wife, who was huddled on the bed, visibly uncomfortable. I felt a shiver run down my spine, unsure of where he was going with this. He continued as if he were recounting the most casual story in the world. "My dear wife here has always been a very submissive woman, never complained about anything until now. She found out about us and had the audacity to confront me, to threaten to leave. Imagine that. Her, the obedient little girl, daring to oppose me." He laughed, a dry, cold laugh that seemed to cut through the air. So, after a few weeks of reflection, I realized there was a more interesting solution. I decided she needed to learn a lesson. And who better to teach her than you? I blinked, unable to believe what I was hearing. My heart started to race, a mix of anger and confusion growing inside me. Teach her a lesson?
What are you talking about?
I asked, trying to stay calm but already knowing something horrific was about to happen. He looked at me with that malevolent smile on his face and said, I want you to do to her what you do to me.
But not just that.
I want you to humiliate her, to make her feel what it's like to be used, discarded. I want her to understand that, in the end, she has no control over anything, neither over me nor over her own life. I want her to see what I do every night with you and know that this is how things will be from now on. And if she resists, he paused, his gaze turning even darker. I've made arrangements for this little secret of ours to be known by everyone she knows. Family, friends, she will be destroyed. At that moment, I didn't know if I felt disgust, anger, or a mixture of both. The girl on the bed was in shock, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't say a word. I stood up slowly, trying to process what he had just said. Do you really think I'm going to do this? That I'll be part of this monstrosity? He shrugged with a smug smile. You do this every day, dear. What's the difference now? The difference, I thought, was that I had never been part of something so twisted before. This man, whom I had seen as just another client, had revealed his true face, a cruel manipulator willing to destroy his own wife for sheer sadistic pleasure. I looked at the young woman sitting on the bed, trembling with fear, and something inside me snapped. Did I hate what I did?
No.
I had always known what I was involved in, had always been honest with myself about the men who came in and out of my life. But this was different. This man wanted me to become something I never wanted to be, an instrument of his cruelty. No, I said firmly. I'm not going to do this. He looked at me with an expression of disbelief, as if he had never imagined someone could challenge him. You're joking, right? I pay very well, actually. And now, when I finally ask for something that really matters, you refuse? I stepped forward, feeling the anger rise within me. I am not your tool. You want to destroy your wife? Do it yourself. But I will not participate. He stood up slowly, throwing the cigarette on the ground and crushing it with his foot. The look on his face changed from amused to something much more threatening. You're making a big mistake. A mistake that will cost you dearly. I knew he was serious. The kind of men I worked with didn't take challenges easily. But at that moment, something inside me broke. I could no longer ignore what he represented. Get out of here, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And take your wife with you. He stood there for a few seconds, staring at me as if deciding what to do. Then, without a word, he turned to the young woman on the bed and pulled her by the arm, dragging her out of the room. She looked at me one last time, with a look I would never forget, a mix of gratitude and despair. As the door closed behind them, I felt a wave of relief mixed with deep anger. That was the day I realized that, no matter how much I thought I had control over my life, there were limits. There were things I would never be willing to do, even for money. And at that moment, I knew my life was about to change. I could no longer continue in that world, knowing what could happen. After that day, no matter how hard I tried to move on, I couldn't get that scene out of my head. The image of that young woman, so terrified and so lost, haunted me. I knew it wasn't my responsibility, knew that what she was going through with that man was beyond my control, but something within me wouldn't let me simply ignore it. Maybe it was the fact that I had also suffered a major heartbreak before entering this world, or perhaps it was the sheer and simple empathy I couldn't suppress. I knew, from the moment he left dragging that woman, that she wasn't just trapped in an unhappy marriage, she was under the control of a cruel man. And as a witness to that abuse, I couldn't simply pretend nothing had happened. I began to search for them discreetly. I knew where he lived and worked, and through some contacts, I learned that she hardly ever left the house. Every time I remembered the look of desperation in her eyes, something gnawed at me from within. I started looking for ways to help. First, I tried to approach her discreetly in public places. I saw her several times in a supermarket or a pharmacy, always with that empty look, always downcast. But when I tried to get closer, she would flee. It was as if she feared any contact. Deep down, I knew she was trapped in a cycle of abuse, a cycle that was hard to escape. And the more she ran, the more compelled I felt to do something. The situation reached a point where I couldn't focus on my work anymore. I stopped accepting clients for weeks, and my mind was fixed on finding a way to help that woman, even if she didn't know, or worse, didn't want it. I decided I needed evidence of the abuse. I knew that her testimony alone wouldn't be enough, and she would never speak out on her own. The only way to take that man down was with solid evidence. That's when I started investigating more thoroughly. I discovered, through some connections, that he was violent not just at home but also in shady business dealings. He had several accounts moving money in suspicious ways, which gave me an edge in tracking his movements. I managed to discreetly install a hidden camera in a place where he frequently met with other men to discuss shady matters. But that wasn't enough. I needed proof of physical abuse. One night, after weeks of observation, the opportunity arose. He came home drunk, shouting at her right at the door. I decided that this was the moment. I could no longer wait. I called the police, reporting the assault. Meanwhile, I filmed everything from a distance through the window with a discreet camera. Every word he said, every insult, and finally, the moment he raised his hand and struck her hard. My heart raced, but at the same time, I knew I was doing the right thing. The police arrived within minutes, and he was taken away. I was called to testify as a witness, and the footage I recorded was more than enough to ensure his conviction. At that moment, I thought I had finally done something good, that the woman who had suffered so much at his hands would finally be free. I felt relieved, as if I had achieved justice. However, my illusion that she would be grateful was quickly shattered. A few days later, I went to find her to see how she was doing. I thought it would be a meeting full of relief, that she would understand the sacrifice I had made and how much I had tried to help her. However, as soon as she saw me, her expression changed from fear to something much darker. "You destroyed my life," she told me, her eyes filled with fury. "You did this on purpose. I know what you want." I was in shock, not understanding what was happening. "I just wanted to help you," I said, trying to calm the situation.
He was hurting you.
I couldn't let it continue. She approached me with eyes full of hatred. "I didn't ask for your help. He's my husband, and now you've taken him away from me. You did this because you want him all to yourself. I thought you were just another prostitute, but now I know you want to steal the man I love." I tried to argue, explain that it wasn't like that the man was destroying her, but she didn't want to listen. She started insulting me, humiliating me, throwing in my face the fact that I worked as an escort. "Do you think you're better than me? Just because you make easy money? I know how you seduced him, how you manipulated him. You want my place, but you'll never be more than a cheap woman. He will never love you like he loves me." Her words cut deep. I knew she was in denial, trapped in a toxic cycle, but still, the ferocity with which she attacked me left me paralyzed. The woman I had tried to save was blaming me, hating me, and more than that, she was willing to endure any abuse just to not lose the man who was abusing her. I stood there, speechless, as she continued to scream, tears streaming down her face. Finally, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone, stunned. I didn't expect thanks, but I never thought I'd be blamed for saving someone from a monster. That day, I learned a bitter lesson. No matter how much you want to help someone, not everyone is ready to be saved. Some people, no matter how much they are suffering, prefer their chains to freedom. Weeks passed since that tumultuous day, and, to my surprise, or perhaps not so much, he was released. I learned through contacts that the wife hadn't filed a police report or followed up on the case, and without her testimony, the evidence I had gathered wasn't enough to keep him in jail for long. It was as if everything I went through, everything I risked to get her out of that situation, had been in vain. I found out he had returned to his usual haunts, the same adult entertainment venues, as if nothing had happened. At first, I thought he might have changed, that maybe his time in jail had taught him a lesson. But I quickly realized he was the same man, full of arrogance, with that same coldness in his eyes. He had learned nothing. On the contrary, he seemed even more brazen, as if he were above consequences. I heard from other girls that he was becoming increasingly violent and impatient. The same stories of control and abuse. But this time, I knew it wasn't just with his wife. It was a cycle he repeated with any woman who entered his life. And even though I had escaped that specific moment, I knew it wouldn't end well for anyone involved. What surprised me was my own reaction to all of this. Before, as difficult as it was, I handled that kind of situation, thinking it was just part of my job. I had always been aware of the choices I made and the environment I was in. But after everything I experienced with him, something inside me changed. I could no longer continue with that job in the same way. The image of him, his cruel gaze, the way he manipulated the lives of the women around him, made me realize I no longer wanted to be part of such a world. I had always believed I had control over my life, that I knew exactly where I was stepping, but now everything seemed different. It was no longer just about money or survival. It was about dignity, about knowing the limits of what I was willing to endure. Every time I remembered how I was involved in that monstrosity, I felt further from the person I used to be. So, after much reflection, I decided it was time to leave. To leave that world behind. It was no longer just a matter of work. It was a matter of inner peace. I couldn't continue watching men like him, or women trapped like his wife, destroy lives, including mine. I quit the job. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only one that felt right at that moment. I didn't know exactly where I would go next or what I would do with my life, but at that moment, one thing was clear. I would never again let someone like him have power over me or my choices. Perhaps, for many, my departure won't make a difference. Perhaps he'll continue the cycle, returning to the same places, finding other victims to fuel his cruelty. But for me, it was over. And, in a way, feeling that I was leaving it behind was the only victory I could take from this whole story. And so, once again, life moved on. But this time, it moved on without the shadows of that man, and with the hope of a new beginning. What did you think of this journey? If you liked it, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to share this story with those who need to hear it.